Electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Open your mind.
Well, happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to Conversations on the Fringe. I'm your host, Jeff Spike Wong, and I'm so excited today that we have our buddy, our friend, returning back. He, to me, is the calm in the eye of the storm for us Patriots. He is also the voice of reason at times. I especially love when he reflects in his coffee chats on where we're at. Often he brings the heart and soul to the Patriot community. So please welcome back Patriot Underground. How are you doing today?
Wow, that's quite an introduction, man. Thank you. I really do appreciate that. And I'm doing well. We were chatting a little bit backstage and we were both sharing some thoughts and feelings about everything that's been happening over the past couple of months. I think it was maybe a couple of months back that we sat down for our first chat. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, before Christmas.
I think it was before. I was going to say, yeah, roughly about a couple months ago. And my goodness, the landscape has altered dramatically in a positive way. But at the same time, we're also experiencing quite a bit of turbulence. You know, the early winds of the coming storm is the way I like to look at it. Is what we're really starting to experience that at this point. So I'm here for it, and I really appreciate you having me back on the show. You have to forgive my cat; he's going to photobomb me a couple times here. But yeah, I'm happy to be here. It's an honor to be on your platform, and I'm looking forward to our chat again. Thank you.
Well, fantastic. I'm glad you're here. And let's start with something that we just witnessed a couple days ago, which is our President Donald Trump's State of the Union address. What is your thought behind what he basically showed us that evening?
Well, I kind of like to call, I put a Q associated with everything that I can, like the State of the Union is the way I look at it.
I love it.
And I'm sure you probably saw there was on Truth Social, the image of State of the Union, and the O was made to look like a Q. It was a cursive O. So that was my first clue. I mean, you know, when I look at the State of the Union, you know that it's just going to be for us, for the Anons out there. It's basically a calm fest. That's what we look for. We know that he's delivering when President Trump speaks. He's so brilliant. He's able to communicate to various different audiences at the same time. And primarily the State of the Union is for all the normies out there, for the people who are watching and, you know, they're anticipating like what they've seen happen all of their lives. President gets up there, they talk about all of their accomplishments over the first year in office and all the things that are going so well. And then of course you see the dichotomy between the Democrats and the Republicans, how the Democrats refuse to stand and meanwhile, the Republicans are, you know, standing up and clapping every 2 seconds, and it's quite a spectacle, indeed. But that's the lens that I look at it through. Is I'm looking for all of the comms, and indeed, there were plenty of them. Probably far too many for me to even name here. My favorite one I already mentioned. They're just letting us know, a little wink and a nod, and that I have to give a hat tip to Enoch. He was the one who identified that, and as it turns out, I didn't realize this at first, but I heard somebody talk about it subsequently, that he right-clicked on the image, and the image name was Signal, and then the digits on the file added up to 17, which was pretty cool. So they turned the O into a Q. They told us it was a signal. The digits add up to 17. I mean, my goodness, how many times have we seen this happen over the course of this journey? It's insane. I mean, you can literally, and there probably will be books written about it. He talked about inflation being 1.7%. He also mentioned that he's got 18 trillion in new investments versus the 1 trillion that came in under Biden. So you can do some simple math there. Uh, Another interesting moment is when he had the USA hockey players there.
Mm.
And the entire team wasn't there. There were 17 players exactly. There were 9 on one side and 8 on another. So it's like you can just go on and on with that stuff. President Trump entered the chamber, I believe it was 9:08, so that adds up to a 17. The speech time was about 107 minutes, and he actually, and in simple gematria, you just drop the zero. So they're everywhere, and he started speaking at. Some people are saying 9:12, but I was looking, and depending on what clock you were looking, I was pretty close to 9:11 when he started the speech, and so there were so many things to pick out, and I watched it and I was encouraged, as I always am whenever I hear the president. Not that I am ever in any way not confident about the plan, but there's just something about them, the white hat productions, as we call them, just continually underscoring that they are in control and putting their signature on literally everything that we see. Like you told us that we are the gatekeepers of all information. And by all, we mean all information. And so this was a great example of that. Meanwhile, you also had the Democrat clown show when they were all dressed up in frogs. I don't know if you saw that as well, but I mean, it was just so over the top ridiculous. They simul-streamed this while the State of the Union was going on, somehow thinking, I mean, we all know that this is a show, but for the normies out there, they got to be scratching their heads and wondering, like, who thought this was a good idea to get all the Democrats out there in frog costumes? So, once again, another example of, at least in my opinion, evidencing the fact that the White Hats are in full control. And indeed, there were a number of messages in there for us, but also I think primarily when you're looking at the target audience, it's to draw that comparison between what the conservatives, what Trump are standing for, and what the agenda that they're trying to push through for the American people versus what the Democrats are standing for, or sitting for, I should say. They refuse to, they refuse to stand for the most obvious moments, and so that is a direct calm to all of the normies out there who are watching this and going, "Wait a second, like what?" Who do these people actually represent? They seem to represent anybody but American citizens. And that's really been the whole theme of this movie script, where the Democrats are basically just being allowed to have enough rope to hang themselves with, and red pill the public in the process. So it was a beautiful, beautiful way to sit down and just kind of enjoy some popcorn and feel pretty good about the direction that we're headed. And of course, it's also amidst the backdrop of far, far more important issues, which I'm sure we're going to get into tonight at some level. But it was a spectacle for sure. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that what it brought to the attention to the Democratic Party glaringly on a televised nationally platform, that they're so convicted on against the president of the United States, they're willing to sacrifice everything for the betterment of America to show that. Once in a while, you see somebody clap, but as a whole, how can the Democratic Party survive this? Or is this actually the moment that we're watching the demise of this bipartisan system?
Well, I think that's exactly what we're watching. We were told that the Democratic Party, once this is all over, the Democratic Party will cease to exist. And what type of a political system we're going to have is speculative. President Trump has seemingly indicated that, in the next presidential election, it's like you're not even going to really have to vote anymore. That these people are going to be gone. I mean, he hasn't come out and said that overtly, but these people are going to be gone, and the country is going to be unified. And it's going to be a pretty interesting path forward. I mean, we don't really know what that's going to look like. Our whole lives, we've been subjected to this false left-right paradigm, and
Yes.
people have chosen a side. Am I left, right? Am I somewhere in the center? And that's been this false reality that we've been saddled with And indeed, it's not like all the Republicans walk on water either. We know that we call it the uni-party for a reason. So it's not like just the Democrat Party is going to cease to exist, but there are going to be a massive, massive amount of rhinos that are exposed as well. And that's already happening. So are we going to, and this is something that I've thought about, are we going to just sort of get rid of political parties? Are they going to be a thing of the past? We know that the founders didn't really like the idea of political parties for the exact reason that for all the reasons that we don't, quite frankly. So who knows what that's going to look like? Is the partisan party system going to go away, or is it going to be replaced by something? Because the reality is that even when the country unifies, and I believe we're already in the process of doing that, despite the optics of division, which is a whole separate conversation. But it doesn't mean necessarily that we're going to agree on everything, that we're going to be unanimously in support or not in support of certain initiatives and certain policies moving forward. So there's probably going to be some degree of, I don't want to call it partisanship or political parties, but there's probably going to be some degree of choice, I would imagine, in terms of who we vote for. But I envision the system looking radically different than the way it does now. And in fact, the whole point of this movie and the negative optics of the Trump administration seemingly not, stonewalling on Epstein, seemingly taking the opposite position of the will of the American people, siding with Israel, gearing up for this, the optics of what's going to look like a war with Iran, all of these things. I could go on and on and on. It seems as if there's going to be that there's a concerted effort by the White Hats to make sure that both sides of the political spectrum for the target audience are engaged. That's why Trump is made to look this way, so that it keeps the left in basically continually believing that they're going to get Trump, like we're going to get him this time. We've been going after him for a decade. We haven't been able to get him, but it's that Trump derangement syndrome that they've weaponized against the left, so to speak, in order to keep them engaged with this process. And then, of course, the Democrats are being exposed as well. And I think the whole purpose of that is to do exactly what I just described, is to point out the uni-party and show that basically they're just two wings of the same corrupt, evil bird. And then, of course, above the cloud line is the cabal, and that's all going to be exposed as well, as they're the puppet masters who have these people on strings. So once all those strings are cut, once everything comes out, what that's going to look like at the end of the day, who knows? But it's certainly going to be a lot better than what we've ever known in our lifetime, I can tell you for sure.
Yeah, I believe the shift in especially the political party is going to be, like you said, something that we probably could not imagine because we've only seen this bipartisan system.
Yeah, right.
But because of the evilness that is with the participants, it regardless what label they wear, this is the cause of the problem of humanity. So until we stop having to follow the label from the programming, the brainwashing, the tradition, and this is something that I think is probably the hardest for most people that's going to have to grasp, just due to the fact that tradition runs rich and has been taught for so many generations to follow because grandpa did it, because my dad did it, and this goes across the board. Opposed to just political, we're talking about even the way we behave, the way we celebrate holidays, even the sports we watch, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, the hardest thing that I see when I get on social media, especially X, and I know you probably get a lot of stuff from X as well, because I listen to your podcast and your discussion with Matt, of course, with Mike. And these topics that would come up that I've seen as well. And I'm thinking to myself, how much of this is actually factual and how much of this is actually being spun? In other words, things that are put out there for us to go, let me think about that a little bit. Let me think about this a little bit. Now, I'll start with this. About this year, last year, third to fourth quarter, we start to get this influx of the history of the Jew. And this wasn't really talked about nearly as much 4 years ago by any stretch. Now, unless you've been into the occult, into things of that nature, you just never really had any kind of I think briefing on blood rituals or histories of baby kidnappings and trafficking and cannibalism, right? Because that's just not in the vernacular. But if you're studying black magic and so forth like that, you have a lot of literature that goes this direction. Now, the reason why I brought this up is that is now, especially after the Epstein file kind of opened up the door about what pedophilia, they're having sex with kids, that trans over to not just kids, infants. And then it became adrenochrome, bloodletting, blood drinking, blood sacrifice rituals. Then all of a sudden we started to get X peppering these Jewish rabbis in these odd, so-called interviews or segments. Like, for instance, when Rabbi Abraham Finkelstein, we're talking about good 15 years ago, talking about blood rituals and Passover.
Yeah, I saw that clip. Yeah.
Right? So all of a sudden, what are we actually looking at? Is this a steer, a direction saying, okay, we all know Q says we're saving Israel for last. And we all know this Israel isn't Israelites back in the day, Judea, Jewish people came from that. That isn't the same as what we're dealing with today. I think we all covered that, right? Yep. So what is your take in regards to, and I've heard you say many times that some Jewish people are good, but some of these people are, just heinous, just the horde of the shit shows Yeah. Is this Jewish label, the confusion of it all, designed to do just that? Because it's like hiding behind something that he says, hey, heavy metal music, it's great. It's great, musicianship, it's great, this and that. If you look at the underlying feed of the frequency, the vibrations and all that, it's pure evil. So there's no hiding behind that, So give me your thoughts now coming into, March of 2026. How is this Jewish, not necessarily Jewish as a religion, but this whole history of these rituals, these kidnappings, so on, in many different cultures, and how they get exiled? What is your thought?
Well, it's a complicated question. My goodness. I would say that, first of all, there's roughly, my understanding is there's roughly about 15, 16 million Jewish people around the world. Now, I've said, and I happen to, I grew up in an area around a lot of Jewish people who are wonderful people. As a matter of fact, my neighbor, my next door neighbor, he's one of my closest friends, and he's a Jewish guy. So I've been very sensitive to this issue in the sense that I don't believe for a moment that all Jews are involved and engaged in what you just described, satanic ritual abuse. This is actually an ancient satanic cult that goes back to, depending upon what history you subscribe to, a lot of people know the story about the Khazars. And of course, mainline history will tell you that's been debunked. That's blah, blah, blah. The reality of the matter is that we don't pay attention to what mainline history says. They lie about everything. Yeah. And as the story goes, I believe it was in the 10th century, something along those lines, that the Tsar of Russia finally just got fed up with their demonic practices, their ritualistic killings, slaughtering of babies. All of the horrific stuff that we're now being subjected to. And said to them, look, we're going to give you one more chance at this, but you have to give up all this devil worship, and you have to choose one of the three dominant religions, which were Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And they chose Islam, but continued their satanic practices. And eventually the Russians went in there to try to wipe them out, but they escaped just in time, as the story goes, and fled all throughout Europe to different areas. So this is I'm not a historian. I'm not an expert. I can't, I can't necessarily prove all these things. This is just what I've been able to come across in my own research, looking into the subject. So I don't think that we're dealing with a blanket label that we can put on all Jewish people. As a matter of fact, I think that's the reason, one of the main reasons, that Israel is being saved for last, because it is such a sensitive issue. You can imagine, if it were any other religion, they would have to handle it the same way, right? If there was
Mhm.
um, if there was a satanic cult within, any other of the world's religion, especially one that was dominant in multiple areas of the world, that would cause a huge blowback. And so therefore, naturally, they would have to tread very carefully, because what the white hats don't want is they don't want people just thinking it's all Jews. And I firmly
Mhm.
believe that. Now, to your question before, was this done? Did they take up this mantle of Judaism and so forth as a sort of shield of protection? I think the answer to that is very clearly yes. That's why we've never really been able to have honest discussions about this satanic cult that embedded itself. I personally believe, I mean, and there's a whole discussion about the Talmud and the history there, but I personally believe that most of the Jews around the world are kind of more like reform in their mindset, not necessarily like Orthodox. I mean, not Orthodox and conservative Jews in Israel and in certain other parts of the country, but in my experience, the Jewish people that I know, they identify as being Jewish culturally and as a religion, but they don't. They have a very, very relaxed attitude about their religious practices and so forth. And they're normies just like everybody else. They go to temple once or twice a year. They celebrate Hanukkah. They light the candles, the menorah. They go to their high holiday services and things like that. They're not bad people. Um, so I think what's happening right now is that there's a very delicate balance that the white hats have to tread here. They have to expose this satanic cult, which, by the way, is not exclusively Jewish. We have to make that very clear as well.
I
So,
agree.
I
Yep.
mean, it's a fact. I mean, you just look at the Vatican, you look at many of these other parts, tentacles of the cabal
Yep.
that involve their co-conspirators, if you will, who are not Jewish. And there are a lot of some of the worst monsters out there weren't necessarily Jewish. So that's also something. I mean, it's not about Christianity versus Judaism or anything along those lines. I think they're trying to get rid of that false paradigm, and they're trying to get in a similar way with what we were talking about with the political parties,
Mhm.
to recognize that it's not about left versus right. It's not about Jew versus Christian or any other religion. That's the way that the cabal has always played us against one another, but rather to expose evil so that we recognize that it's actually a battle between good and evil. And within any group of people, there's going to be good and there's going to be evil. There are Christians, people who are born into Christian families who are not good people,
Yep.
who espouse to be Christians and are engaged in some evil practices themselves. So I mean, I think in my view, that's the way I look at it, is that this is about good versus evil. Now, obviously, it's intellectually dishonest to say that there's not a Jewish cabal that at the top of the pyramid, if you will, at least according to my knowledge, are the Zionists. I mean, that's the truth. So there's no
Mhm.
avoiding. But at the same time, they've always used. I mean, why do you think that the very year that they established the Federal Reserve and the income tax in 1913, that they had to establish at the same time the Anti-Defamation League, because they didn't want people to start noticing and saying, well, wait a second, what's going on here? With all of these, this seeming takeover of our system and so forth. So they've always used that anti-Semitism and the Anti-Defamation League as a way, as a means of defense, hiding behind the religion and
Yep.
saying, well, you can't talk about the Rothschilds, you can't talk about the disproportionate amount of Jews who are in positions of power, who are billionaires, et cetera. Like half the billionaires in the United States are Jewish. Doesn't mean that they're all evil, but so there is some truth to it, indeed, in terms of the hierarchy of this evil structure, that there is at the top of the pyramid a Jewish cult, no question. But they also have their co-conspirators as well. So I think what's happening is the white hats are exposing this evil, but at the same time, they're also doing it in a very measured and gradual way, so that people are not going to associate it with Judaism, because the last thing that they want is for people to start taking matters into their own hands and going out and attacking Jewish people thinking that they're all evil, because that's not the truth. They have to be exposed, but it has to be done in a way where the public gradually comes to the conclusion that this isn't just about Jews, but it's an evil satanic group that spans that they're all Satanists. They hide behind many different shields. I mean, look at Hillary Clinton, for example.
Yeah.
Okay? Not a Jew. Bill Clinton, not a Jew.
Right.
And we know Huma Abedin, not a Jew. She was on the Frazzle Drip video with Hillary.
Yeah.
And so these are demons. That's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with demons, many of whom are Jewish, okay, but not all. And at the top of the pyramid structure, yes, there is a Zionist controlling. I believe as high up as you want to go in their pyramid, you're going to get the Jewish controllers, the cabal controllers, the Zionists, the Rothschilds, etc. But like I said, not exclusive. So it's an important question, and I'm glad you asked me that. And I always try to carve that into my answer and say, whenever we start talking about the Jews and the cabal, we're not talking about all Jews. And
Right.
I firmly believe that. So
yeah, thank you so much for that, because that's one of the things that I've noticed, that the X propaganda, I'm going to call it that, because it's pushing it. There's so many factors when I look on X and I look at what they're trying to put in our feeds to create some sort of reaction, right? For instance, such of especially crime, violence, using Black people. And you and I both know white people fight, Chinese people fight, Indian people fight, but why is there overwhelmingly Black people fighting on X? It's because of programming to try to get us to believe something. And I think this is a part of breaking the MK Ultra that's extremely important for all of us who's coming into this cycle, this new wave of energy coming in. Now, when you're saying that there's great Jewish practitioners, I firmly believe that, because I have friends that's Jewish, that they do Passover. It's a family thing. It's a religious, spiritual moment for them of their clarity. And I'm good with that. And at the same time, if you go higher up in the Vatican, that is about as Luciferian, satanic as you're going to get, because they're doing the same thing. They're killing kids.
Exactly.
Right? You go to the Mormon. Utah has a huge satanic community. There's been so many survivors that came out and started doing podcasts of telling how their family has been involved in ritualistic sexual abuse.
Right.
So with you just breaking out very clear, is not just the Jews and trying to create anti-Semite, was an extremely important key point, especially for the red pill audience who's been, somewhat awakened. So they go digging, and then X being the source that we have, that seems to be the most liberal, if you will, meaning that we can see the most stuff without having it to be filtered.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm noticing that the filtering is done on a particular way, because I just don't buy everything that they're giving me.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you said that, because it's really about breaking the programming. It's about breaking the matrix belief system and the divide and conquer strategy. Now but what's somewhat paradoxical about that is that you need to show people that in order to get them to recognize it, while at the same time flooding them with a whole bunch of exposure and having people gradually come to the awakening on their own, that this is not about one group against another, that we're being pitted against one another. The social media algorithms are designed that way. As a matter of fact, Mark Zuckerberg, I would put his name in air quotes, he's on trial right now for for social media, and in essence, the whole principle of the addictive factor is what they're focusing on now, knowing that it's a dopamine feedback loop, that people aren't going to be able to resist using it, but also that it causes all types of mental health problems. But particularly what they're focusing on now is like young kids and teens, because they're born into a world, but this stuff is everywhere. And they knew full well that they were developing a system that was going to make people tribal, that was going to make people divided, that was going to make people feel bad about themselves, that was going to do all of this stuff to essentially poison society. So that's happening right alongside. So it's this weird thing where you have to demonstrate the paradigm, but you also have to at the same time cause cognitive dissonance by introducing other narratives and other truths at the same time, so that people can go, wait a second, now I'm being given mixed messages here. It's not just the old system of divide and conquer that I'm used to right now. Like they're being shown that, but they're also listening to other people talk about that very system and point it out and say, this is exactly the problem. We have above us the people that we call leaders, who aren't even really elected. They steal elections anyway. They don't really
Yeah.
represent us. That's the first illusion. But even above them, and this is why the Epstein case is so important, is there's people who are, like I said, above the cloud line, the puppet masters, who are playing all of us against each other, like like it's like a grand chessboard. Matter of fact,
Yes.
Brzezinski wrote a book called The Grand Chessboard. So it's getting people to evaluate what they've always been subjected to, I think even more intensely, so that they notice it even more, but at the same time presenting the dichotomy there and showing them, and listening to podcasts like this where we're having discussions. I mean, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, people weren't really having these types of discussions. They weren't pointing this out because everybody was still asleep. Everybody was on autopilot. That's really what it came down to, is we were just existing in this matrix without ever really questioning reality, without ever even questioning, like, well, who's really in control here? And thinking, I mean, I can remember when I was younger, I don't know if you remember that show 24 with Kiefer Sutherland.
Yes.
And I remember I was really young when that came out. Well, not really young, but I was in my early 20s. It was right after, I think it was right after 9/11, in the very early 2000s. So I was still kind of like in my college years at that point. And I remember watching that show, and I don't really remember the details, but whoever the actor was who was playing the president, there was one scene, and then it became several scenes, became like a theme in the show, where these people in a shadowy room were talking to the president and giving him orders over the phone. And that like blew my mind. I was like, what is this? Who gives the president, like, I still actually believed that the president was really the man in charge. I had no idea, no consciousness of the possibility that there was a cabal, a deep state, anything along those lines. And back then, very few people did, quite frankly. And since, I mean, if you fast forward to, I mean, heck, even I would say the whole concept of a deep state has become widely accepted over the past 5, 6, 7 years. It's not even really questioned anymore. That term is being used on mainstream media at
Yeah.
this point. So it just goes to show you how we're gradually progressing, and we're all at different phases of our journey. That was where I was at that point, but I can never forget that there are a lot of people out there who, I mean, who maybe because of their age, just maybe because they've been on autopilot, fast asleep for such a long time, who are in a similar place where, like, we often take things for granted because we've been studying this stuff, and we've been engaged with it for so long that it becomes normal after a while to talk about these things. And sometimes you can lose sight of the fact that there are people who have never heard these ideas before, that they're
Mhm.
being subjected to this stuff for the very first time. And I
Yeah.
would say probably a majority of the people, especially with the level, the level of conversations that we have and the rabbit holes that we go down, the vast majority of the population has not been subjected to any of this stuff, which, by the way, is all the truth. So it is a process, is a gradual process of uh, acquainting people with the truth by presenting them with conflicting narratives, and using, because of and this is why it's so important that I mean, none of this stuff would ever happen if the deep state were still in control, because now with the good guys in control of media, albeit covertly, we're allowed to have these conversations. We're not being censored. And so these ideas can spread freely and gradually penetrate the consciousness of more and more people out there. And that's really the whole purpose behind the Great Awakening is, you show them all the evil, you subject everybody to the evil, probably more intensely than they've ever been before. But at the same time, you're also questioning that evil. You show them the system and how it operates, but at the same time, you question that system and who really controls it. And gradually, as more and more detail comes out, people are starting to see, oh yeah, there actually is, these Q people aren't so crazy after all. There is a deep state. There are, this Epstein guy really did work for the Rothschilds, and so it's a progression. And that's what we're living through right now. This is the Great Awakening, where people, for the first time in history, in our history anyway, we're allowed to have open and honest conversations about very difficult subjects that are ultimately going to lead us to the truth. So I think it's something that is absolutely. I mean, I don't even know if I have words to describe how incredible this is. Q told us it's going to be biblical.
Yeah.
By the time that
divine
we get
timing.
And divine timing, and timing is everything, right? And that's it's been part of the frustration that we've had with the length of the process, and how it's been a long and grinding road. I was actually just thinking to myself today, I was like, I have some days where I'm like, I wish I had started this like a few years later, so that I wasn't so exhausted at this point in time. But we all wake up when we wake up, and but we're starting to get to a point, I believe, where we're getting very close to achieving a critical mass of people who are maybe not fully awake, but who have had their programming significantly, the cognitive dissonance has significantly broken down their programming and their matrix belief system, so that they're now open to the truth. And that's really what this is all about.
Yeah. To save humanity, I think this is a must, because we can't just keep on trucking along being bots and being worker bees and just watch our generation being destroyed by those who have wealth, those who have control. And you hit the nail on the head about elections still being rigged. We're experiencing this in Texas, because we have not had a good run for the last decade by any stretch of the means. And yet the gubernatorial level, all the way down to the city level, has continuously being fed with corruption. So therefore, the voice of the people doesn't really show. And it's just mind blowing in that sense, that as much as we go out there, be the keyboard warrior, or go talk to the people, friends and families or coworkers or whatnot, everybody seems to be on the same thought process. Hey, yeah, we need to do something because we're getting screwed. But then at election time, you're going, how is this guy getting back in the office? Yeah. So nothing's changing that, right?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think that's a really great example of that is somewhat of a paradox in a sense. It takes a little bit of mental gymnastics at first to understand what's really going on. Now, if the white hats are in control, and I believe that they are and have been for a very long time, and told us, and it really depends upon, I mean, I'm not here to sell anybody on the idea. I'm just kind of conveying what I believe as a proud Q-tard, that we were told all the way back in 2017 that at this point, elections no longer matter moving forward. Why would they not matter? Well, that means that the military is actually in control. They're backstopping everything. Okay. So what else can we deduce from that? Well, it means that if they're in control of everything and they're backstopping it, doesn't mean that like all evil has been removed from the planet. That's not what I'm suggesting. But what I am suggesting is they're doing it for the effect that you just described, which is to make people pissed off.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's really hard for people to understand, is like the good guys are in control, but they're also trying to piss us off at the same time. Not necessarily us, like you and I, because I don't really believe that we're the target audience. We're not the normies. But for all the normies and the people who are going through this process of awakening, for them to say, well, why is it, to get more and more people, a critical mass of people, to start questioning the elections and saying, how do these bozos keep getting in here? Why don't we have fair elections? Why don't we have politicians on Capitol Hill who are willing to fight for the SAVE Act? I mean, like John Thune came up and he's like, oh, we don't really have time to debate that. And meanwhile, they're doing a whole dog parade. I don't know if you saw that through the Capitol. They're bringing all their dogs in there. It was interesting dog comms as well. But this is all being done. It's a production.
Yeah.
it's to show the people. So the American people we want voter ID. We want people to have to prove that they're American. It's like Mamdani comes out and he says, if you want to go and shovel for $15 or $30 an hour, you have to show up with a couple of forms of ID. But meanwhile, you don't have to show up with any ID to vote. So people are going, what the hell is this crap? And so it's designed to get underneath people's skin. And the military is doing that. Why? Because the truth will set you free. But first, it's going to piss you off. And the best way to engage the public, to get out of their autopilot, to snap out of their sleep, their coma, is to get them angry. How do you do that? Well, you can create any type of optics that you want. All right. And it doesn't mean that the bad guys are in control. See, some people jump to that conclusion and they say, well, the good guys, they can't possibly be in control if these bad people keep getting elected to office, or we still don't have secure elections, or we still have chemtrails, or we still, whatever the problem is. I believe very strongly, and I have for a long time, that the good guys, the white hats, are simulating all of this in order to prompt people to shake off of their apathy. Like, people need dramatic examples in order to shake off their apathy and actually get involved and engaged. And the Q drops, the way that it's described, the precipice is when people have the willingness to engage, the willingness to participate as citizens in a free society. That's what this is all about. The whole problem is that because of mass media and because of all of the poisons that they put in the air and the food and the water to dumb us down, all the chemicals, everything, it's a big toxic cocktail. But we've been asleep at the switch for a very, very long time. Not all of us, certainly, thank God, but a vast majority of Americans, and indeed people worldwide, have been completely brainwashed and put to sleep. And in that dreamlike state, if you will, where we become more suggestible, we just, people just passively believe whatever they're told. And then it becomes easier to manipulate people against one another, to manipulate that false paradigm of left versus right, to turn people against each other, to say, oh, that guy's the enemy, or that group is the enemy. They're the problem. So that we never really see above the cloud line and to really question what's going on. So that's what I think is happening right now, is that people need they need to be shocked out of their comatose state. And the only way to do that is to put on these over-the-top, ridiculous scenes in this scripted movie to prompt people to actually wake up and get involved and pay attention and start demanding accountability in various different forms. That's the way I see it. And again, some people will look at it and they'll disagree and they'll say, oh no, it's still the deep state battling against the white hats and they haven't been fully removed yet. That's fine if you want to believe that. That's not my opinion. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day where you stand on that, whether you believe the white hats are in full control like I do, or whether you still believe there's kind of a tit for tat going on with the deep state, or anywhere in between. And I will say, I'll end with this, that yes, I do believe that while I used the metaphor of the pyramid a little while ago, like the top of the pyramid, we were talking about the Zionists at the top of the pyramid, and then there's like the mid-level controllers, and then there's the bottom tier. Covertly, the white hats took out the top tiers already. The Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the bloodline families, the names that most people don't even know by design. They were removed from the chessboard first because they had the most power. This had to be done covertly. And then at the appropriate time, which I believe was the election of 2020, with the stolen election and the January 6th event, I'll just call it an event, that was the time when Trump declared the Insurrection Act and essentially took control of Washington, D.C. in plain sight, where there were 30,000 National Guard troops there under the auspices of security. But we all know, and I'm sure your audience is well aware of the details of what actually occurred that day. They took out the mid-level tiers, and in many cases, they replaced these people with actors. They replaced with actors. In some cases, they presented them with a deal and said, either play ball or you're going to Gitmo for the people who weren't, the true monsters who weren't raping and eating babies and things along those lines.
Yeah.
So now the point being is that what remains is the largest group at the bottom of the pyramid, which is the largest, the most amount of individuals. I don't believe that they've all been taken care of, quite frankly. I do think that there is active mop-up operations that are going on. Cartels being one, for example, the foot soldiers of the cabal. So I don't want your audience to think that I'm just sitting over here and telling you that everything has been taken care of and there's nothing, there's no evil in the world. There's no threats out there. Of course there are. But what we're talking about is the enemy system, this cabal, all of their controllers, their top level people and their mid-level controllers they're all gone.
Yeah.
So the war it's already been won, but that doesn't mean there's not active mop-up situations that are happening, kinetic situations that are going on. So that's just something I thought it was important to point out.
Yeah, absolutely. And the hard part, I think, for most to accept this is because of we're still within the conscious of self. So therefore, if something personally affected you, like for instance, my child got kidnapped, where's the white hat? Somebody is still being taken on a daily basis. Somebody is still being shot at. Somebody is still being killed. When you lose a loved one, it's kind of hard to, I think, then to look at the big picture at all.
I
just
agree.
due to the fact that tragedy is personal, And when you have those kind of attacks, do we just look at it as, well, that's just the part of war? You're just part of the equation that just, being the casualty of it. And how do you explain that to a mother and her parents? You know what I mean? That's the part that is, I think, the hardest in taking the personalization away from it. But one of the factors about the controlling of all humanity, I really do believe, is the label of that religion. Somehow, some way, that they bought into using that religion and then convincing the world that the freedom of choice lies behind your spiritual seeking. So therefore, we will protect no matter what you believe in. And that includes Satanism. You can have a satanic church open down the street and be protected with freedom of religion, which is absolutely absurd. To me,
yeah, that's not going to exist, I don't believe, on the other side of everything that's going to be revealed. And it's one example of how they've taken a concept that was never really designed. It was when the founding fathers came up with the whole idea of like freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of religious worship, et cetera, et cetera. You have to remember the context. I mean, this was a Christian nation. These men were all devout Christians. All right. Maybe not to a man, but I mean, certainly most of them were. And there's no questioning, historically speaking, that this country was founded on a Christian ethic. So it was designed that way, in thinking that anyone who wants to worship God as a way of in a different religion or in a different context, we're going to give them the freedom to do that because that's okay in a free society. I mean, if you're a good person and you just have a different concept of God, some people that I'm friends with, I mean, I'm Christian, okay, but I don't associate exclusively with Christians. There are some people that I'm very close with who are very spiritual and they just refer to God as source. Yeah. There are other people who, I mean, I really don't care. I mean, if you're Jewish, if you're Muslim, if you're a good person, and this ties into what we were saying before, yes, it's all good. And I think that's what the founders had in mind. They weren't thinking along the lines of, let's give people the ability to worship Satan and worship evil and engage in all of these horrific acts. No, that was not the intention at all. So this was something that they weaponized against us. And that's, but what's the greatest trick the devil ever pulled? Convincing the world that he didn't exist, or if he did exist, it was just in the shadows, and there were, it's like, how evil is depicted in the movies and on TV and so forth. It's always an anomaly. Mm-hmm. It's always like this crazy serial killer, or something like that. But it's never presented as what it actually is, which is industrial scale evil. That's what these people are involved in. They're involved in human trafficking, murder, ritualistic satanic murder, the most unbelievably heinous acts that you can imagine, and then beyond what you can even imagine. And they were doing it on an industrial scale.
Yeah.
And once the world wakes up to that and redefines the whole concept of what evil is and how it manifests, that's one of the big questions people are going to be asking themselves, like, how in the world did we get to a point where all of this stuff was going on and we didn't know?
Right.
Why? Because we were brainwashed. Why? Because they controlled all the information. Why? Because they shut down the real conversations that would have led us to the truth. And once that truth is out of the bag and people understand that good and evil cannot coexist. Now, I'm not suggesting here, there are some people who are going to tell you that at the end of this process that all evil is going to be wiped away from the face of the earth. I'd love to believe that. Okay, I really would. But like you said a moment ago, evil is still out there, right? There are still people who are kidnapping kids. There are still people who are committing crimes. There's that element, the human nature. But I'm not sure we're ever going to fully get rid of that. But I will say is going to be a radically different approach societally toward crime and evil, and because people are going to have these truths are going to be so deeply ingrained,
right?
And it's going to go to the DNA level. Like, we are not going to tolerate the same type of bullshit. And people, once they're awake, I mean, imagine how different the world would be if all the people out there were walking around as awake and aware as you and I, and willing and able and ready to protect other people. Criminals would have a really tough time operating in that world. The reason that they were able to do it is, again, because we were asleep at the switch, because we through gradual process gave up we gave up all of the different facets to a free society that promote truth, the proliferation of truthful information. Rather, we sat back and we allowed this group deceiving us, telling us a whole bunch of lies and so forth, to essentially give that up and to cede our power over to them. So when Trump says, we're giving power back to the people, that has multiple different contexts, but probably the most important one is to actually give us back our consciousness, our awareness of the true nature of the world. And you go back to earlier periods in history. I mean, they didn't tolerate any of this bullshit. Somebody was, touched a kid. They would go grab them and lynch them on the spot. They would hunt them down and cut off their, what. I mean, that's the way that this type of stuff needs to be handled. Now, I'm not suggesting vigilantism or anything, but what I am suggesting is, like, that's natural human instinct. When you recognize a threat,
right,
you go after and you deal with that threat as a society, and you do not tolerate it for a second. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, how many people, there are a lot of people out there, once they start seeing people publicly executed for touching children, they might think twice, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I think there's several steps we need to go through before we reach enlightenment, to the point of, if the consciousness would start to embrace and connect to the higher source, to self, to the crown chakra and all that. But prior to getting there, I think there's things that needs to be, a lot of people talk about, how do you deal with pedophiles? Well, wood chipper. You see that comment a lot.
Yeah,
wood chipper. Then you see the comment, of course, chemical castration. Okay. I've always proponed saying penis removal. Take it out. If there is a consequence for that behavior, and you start to know that is the results of your discipline, your punishment is going to be removal of your manhood, you're going to think twice before doing anything.
You're damn right.
Right? So we have gotten to a point that we need to have some kind of structure of punishment. And we have currently, with the judges in the Department of Justice, whether they're bought off or they're in the cult, that you can rape and hurt someone underage and be done with and be out by 2-3 years.
Yeah. And some of them just get
How
probation.
does that exist in our reality? How does that happen?
I saw an example the other day, and I don't remember where it was from, but there was this monster who who beat a toddler to death. I mean,
Right.
we're talking like a 1-year-old kid, just beat the kid to death, and pretty much got off like scot-free, got off with probation, right? And that's one of the things that we have to, I think we need to come to terms with as well as a society, right? Um, why are there not such harsh why are there not harsher punishments for these type of horrific crimes? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because the people who are in charge and running our society are evil. That's why, because this is
Mm,
what they engage in,
yeah.
right? This is the type of evil that they believe in. This is their that's their jam. That's what they do,
Yeah.
right?
That's the harsh truth. Yeah.
Much lesser crimes in terms of just in terms of their nature, much lesser crimes, people get much harsher punishments for. And we see that, by the way, it's not even just in terms of these really horrific crimes, but you see it all the time. I mean, people make jokes about it, but it's true. Like the IRS will audit you for a $600 PayPal transaction.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the government can misplace trillions of dollars, and they just go, oh well, we don't know where it went, and somehow that's okay. So that's part of this process too, is re-examining how we mete out punishment and how we react to these things. And that's another thing that should really piss people off. Why is it that these people can engage in horrific crimes, these monsters can engage in horrific crimes and basically walk off scot-free? That's going to change, I guarantee you. And part of it is I think there's a sense of almost like learned helplessness with the masses. It goes
Yeah.
along with being asleep, being trapped inside of this matrix and just thinking, well, people feel like they're powerless. They feel like they can't control anything. But the reason that they're powerless is because all of our power, again, systematically was taken away from us. The most important is the ability to engage in free speech, right? If you don't have that, that's you don't have a free society. You don't have anything that looks like a free society when you can't honestly discuss ideas. Why do you think it is that, yeah, I mean, sure, there's a military operation going on and so forth, but it's a military civilian alliance. Why do you think it is that we're so far, we've made such progress in terms of the Overton window in addressing these issues over the past several years since Elon Musk took over
Yeah.
X? Okay, that just goes to show you how powerful ideas are. Ideas can change the world, but those ideas have been suppressed, and all of the predators in our society have been in control of the justice system, of how we communicate, taxing us to death, keeping us sick, keeping us in fear, on and on and on and on. And so what's happening now is we're breaking out of that and we are getting our power back. And in that process, we're going to have to address these types of issues. I mean, it's very simple. I mean, if you touch a kid, as far as I'm concerned, you deserve the death penalty. And now
Yeah.
we have people out there, whether you want it to be castration, whether you want it to be the wood chipper, the firing squad, take your pick. I really don't care. If you touch a kid, you deserve to die.
Yeah.
And there are people out there, thank goodness, in the Congress now, just today, Nancy Mace put forward a bill, the death penalty for child rapists. I mean, this is the direction that we need to move in our society, and we're seeing that actually happen, right?
Yeah.
Something like that would have been inconceivable a very short time ago. You would never see anybody in Congress talking about this stuff,
Yeah.
putting forward
Yeah.
those types of initiatives and laws. Not to mention the fact, I mean, again, if you really want to question who's in control here, does anybody believe, I mean, on what planet would they allow the release of the Epstein files if the bad guys were actually in control? So despite all the optics, you ask some pretty logical questions there. I think you come up with a pretty logical answer, which is they're not in control anymore. It's the military that's in control behind the scenes, creating these optics to draw attention to these issues so
Right.
that it wakes up the people and that eventually, I mean, and the goal here is not to get us in perpetual military, like a martial law type of situation. I mean, that might be necessary temporarily as we readjust as a society. The goal here is to unite, to wake people up, to unite them around a core set of beliefs and principles, at the top of that list being the identification of this common enemy that has been ruling over us and pitting us against each other and engaged in all these horrific crimes, to unify us around that. And then from there, we can rebuild our society. And what you just talked about was just one of the many examples of how we need to rebuild our society. And when the people, we the people, are actually in control, and those who are elected to, if we have free and fair elections, that's the other thing. Like I mentioned before, none of these monsters get actually elected. They steal the election. Okay, not that there aren't a lot of brainwashed idiots who vote for these people, but we've come to realize that most of these elections are stolen, especially by the Democrats. If we get true representative government, think about this: true representative government of an awakened population, everything changes at that point.
Absolutely.
You know, our politicians actually represent the will of the people, and not the will of a bunch of idiots, but the will of a bunch of awakened patriots, millions of us. Like Thomas Jefferson said, you know, when the people fear the government, there's tyranny, and when the government fears the people, you have liberty.
Yeah, yeah, and that's 100% true, because at the point of we as humanity, at this point, it's really a breaking point of survival or not. Because if we look at all the evidence that is put in front of us, we're looking at the gene splicing, the DNA manipulations, all those things that's behind the scenes that is coming out. Especially, why the hell is Epstein doing this? Why the hell is Bill Gates or any of these clowns doing these things? And I have distinctively felt this whole thing exists because it is the easier way to procreate and dumb down the human potential. And when I say that, I literally mean that when we're born, we're a clean slate. Okay. We're here to become this great opportunity. And we have this connection through chakra and Kundalini process to become the Kundalini effect of self, the greatness of self, and connect to the consciousness and whatnot. Now, a lot of people is going to look at this and go, what the hell is he talking about? And then again, a lot of people is going to go, well, yeah, because I've been reading about this for a long time. So the connection to the greatest source, whether the creator himself, however it may be that you want to interpret for your individuality, if you don't have that connection, then it's very hard to navigate. It's literally like going outside in the dark and not having a flashlight. You may be able to get somewhere, or you may just run smack into a tree. Now, the reason why I brought this up, because I think there's a huge aspect of the Satanism perversion outside of just pedophilia, because some of these things that's coming out in the sense of the ritualistic of just incredible outrageousness. For instance, Lolita love dolls. You familiar with that term?
Lolita what?
Lolita love dolls.
No, actually, I'm not.
Okay, so what they're doing is they're taking a female after they're trafficked and captured. They remove their tongue, they remove their eyes, they cut their limbs off, and they sell it.
I think I have heard of it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
I didn't know the term, but yeah.
Well, you know, Lolita ties back to that novel in the 50s, and, you know, it's all about pedo and all that crap. Yep. The reason behind the perversion of this is purely satanic. There's no question. And again, you know, I'm sure we talked briefly about this in the past, that I have a deep, deep roots in black magic. And I was a practicing Satanist in my 20s. And I was very fortunate I survived. Very fortunate. And I recently did a podcast regards to addiction to pornography. And the reason behind why I could do a deep dive on this is because I worked in that industry for about 3 years.
You mentioned that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So working in the adult entertainment industry, I got to see so much of this ritualistic crap that is not mainstream. You know, when you got people going in, dropping quarters, looking at dirty movies and whatnot, I would say 98% of those people are just stuck in the animalistic level of themselves. The root chakra up to the second level, which is just basically primal sexuality, it never really get past to the so-called the solar. And so they're not even the heart or anything like that. That's why we're having constant relationship failures. We're having constant conflicts with each other because it's not always connecting, it's not always working effectively. Now, the thing that I've noticed that with perversion in rituals is to keep this level of energy and vibration at this constant because it creates a level of power, empowerment of those who can control others who are involved, basically addicted.
Mm-hmm.
And to see defecation, urination, rituals, and things like that, it's purely humiliation.
Yep.
Right? It's no different than if the principal or a teacher constantly berating the kid at school, and that kid goes home with the low self-esteem, and the parents have no idea why. You know, I thought my kid was good, and all of a sudden he or she's saying, "I hate school. I don't want to go back to school." Is there something that's going on? No, they can't really verbalize it because they're not really assimilated to understand what humiliation really means. So I think there's a level of consciousness being destroyed by these practices.
Oh,
and
yeah.
until we start to teach this on a standardized basis, and I know that sounds easy than done, but if I learned it and other people learned it, it can't be that hard. Because, like I said, I was on the other side of the fence, pure dark magic, purely empowerment by using fear upon others, doing things illegally. And I'm just very fortunate I never got caught, So what is your thought regards to how do we awaken humanity? Because at this point, I'm still looking at it. Let's just talk about this. Tax date's coming up, right? You got to file your tax in April. And there is so many posts I see in local neighborhoods that is in fear of the IRS. I'm still I have to do it, or, it just seems to be the fear drives reality. How do we want to flip that around?
That's the world that they created. That's the world that they've kept us trapped in, based upon fear, based upon ego, based upon, like you said, very low frequency, low vibrations, keeping us tribal, keeping us animalistic. Mainly, though, I would say that you take the example that you just laid out. Why do you know all these things so well? Well, because you were on the other side of the fence. You experienced it directly, right? And this ties into what we were just talking about before. The way that they've been able to do this on such a grand scale is because so many people out there are distracted and don't realize what the real problem is. You see, that's the other thing is, like, it's not like this evil cabal doesn't provide us with a million different bread and circus distractions to keep us focused on things that we think that we want, like always dangling a carrot in front of us to engage our ego, to engage those lower instincts. That's the world that we've always known. Now, you happen to have an experience where you were deeply involved in all of that stuff, and you were able, thank God, to pull yourself out of it. And you were able to ultimately come to the other side of the fence and do what you're doing now, right? And likewise, I mean, I've had experiences in my past, which, I've gone down very dark roads as well. I've had traumas, I've had things that have occurred in my life that most people out there, not to suggest that I'm any different or better than anybody, but your average person hasn't had to engage with, especially at a very young age. I had to fight my way through to get to the other side, the same way you did.
Yeah.
But the cabal was very clever in the sense that knowing that, that's the funny thing about it is that, we do everything we can. It's our natural human instinct to avoid struggle, to avoid pain, to avoid all of those things that ultimately liberate us.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the vast majority, the people who aren't awake, or the people who are in the process maybe now of awakening, or the target audience, as we call them, these are the same individuals out there who have been largely spared. It's not to suggest that they haven't had any problems in their lives, but not to the extent that it's caused them to question reality.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you have deeply rooted trauma, or you have an experience like yours where you've seen up close and personal, which I think at a certain level that was trauma, whether or not you realized it or you didn't. You were so rooted in this evil, and you were so closely exposed to it that it awakened something inside of you, whether you were aware of it or not, that caused you to fight back against it, whether you were consciously aware of that or whether you weren't. But something inside of your spirit, something inside of your soul recognized that something was wrong. Recognize that this wasn't ultimately who you wanted to be. And likewise, the same with me. And I've said many, many times that that's all the pre-awakened out there, the people who listen to your show, my show, and anyone who's listening to this podcast right now is in that category of people who have had those experiences that have forced them to question reality, have forced them, in a sense, to become fighters against the system. Because we've seen up close and personal that the world is not the way that it's depicted to us. It's not the way that it's presented to us. We've pierced the veil. We've seen through it from our own personal experience. Hence, we're awake. Hence, we're fighting back against it. Hence, we've ultimately chosen, at the end of the day, it's a choice. I mean, this is a spiritual war. You're either on God's side or you're on the devil's side. It's that simple. You're the light or the dark, depending on how you want to characterize it. But it's good versus evil. It's a very simple concept. And ultimately, your soul, your spirit has to decide. And I think that because of the way that the world was constructed by the enemy to keep people in the matrix without questioning and keeping them entertained enough, keeping them, like I said, the bread and circuses, keeping them stimulated in various different ways, none of which are good for them, but anything to distract them from the ultimate problem that you and I and everybody else out there listening were able to recognize. So what does that really mean? Well, apply that same principle to what's going on in the world right now. This is the Great Awakening. They're putting people gradually on this like conveyor belt of experiences where like they have to, eventually they're going to have to look at this stuff. They can't ignore it anymore. Right? The enemy hid it all from us. That's why I said, I mean, it was the last thing that they ever would have done, being in control, was revealed who they actually are, revealed their evil to us. They presented themselves as good. I mean, that's what the devil does. He's a deceiver. Tells you he's your friend, makes all types of promises, keeps you engaged, keeps you believing that he's going to deliver for you and so forth. That's the way that the world has been operating for such a long time. Not anymore, though, because again, this evil, while it hasn't been completely eradicated from the planet, the top controllers have been. The most evil amongst us have been. And hence, we have good people in the military who are now forcing, in a simulated environment, to put the rest of the public through, I guess, on a grand scale, the type of experiences that you and I and everybody else out there went through that caused us to wake up.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing. Now they're allowing people to exist inside of the matrix, but at the same time question the matrix and be able to recognize that there's something wrong here, and for the first time in their lives, people are questioning reality. And that's, quite frankly, the most terrifying thing for people, and that's why they fight back so harshly against it. That's what the MK Ultra is built into, that is reacting violently and aggressively against anything that threatens the matrix. It threatens their belief system, threatens the presentation of the world. And the white hats so they're allowing people, the normies, enough real estate, as I call it, to still exist in their place of comfort.
Mhm.
But they're also eroding that real estate more and more and more. With every passing day, it's eroding. It's almost like, they're on an island, and the truth is the ocean, and they're on the island still inside of their matrix. And that that shoreline is eroding. It's getting smaller and smaller every single day. And in every direction they look, they're seeing more and more truth out there, more and more reasons to question whether or not they belong on that island. Eventually, they're going to get to a point where there's not going to be any room left, and they're going to have to jump into that ocean of truth. They're going to have to learn, like all of us did. And that's why we were pre-awakened, to help these people through that process. So that's the way I see it. That's how you deal with it, is that you have to the only way to break down people's programming is to induce cognitive dissonance, to get them to question it. Because that's why Q told us, you can't tell the people, you have to show them. Because when you try to tell people, they don't listen. They react. Right. I mean, it's like I joke about it all the time, but it's true. When people get upset about the white hat military's approach to this whole Great Awakening, to this whole operation. Oh, it's too slow. Oh, they should just dump the truth out on everybody. Oh, they should just, tell everyone the truth. Let the chips fall where they may. Well, how did that work out for you when you tried to red pill people in your own family?
You're right.
Think about it.
Yeah.
And so when you're in the military, you're really going to take that approach. Yeah, let's just dump the truth out on society on a totally unsuspecting, uninitiated, not pre-programmed society and expect that that's going to go well? Of course it's not going to go well. First thing you do when you wake up is you get passionate and you want to try to share the truth with everybody, and you very quickly come to realize that everybody just doesn't want to hear a freaking word you have to say. And they react aggressively, they alienate you, they mock you. In some cases, they attack you.
Yes.
That's exactly the way. Imagine that playing out writ large on a macro scale. You can't do that. So you have to take this long and winding road, this approach where I know it's frustrating because it's like the white hat military is prioritizing the normie consciousness over all of us. Why? Because they know we can handle it. That's why.
Right.
At the end of the day, we are at war. We are the pre-awakened. We're the ones who have the understanding of what's happening in the world. And this is the way it has to be. And some people get pissed off about that. And they say, well, it's about time the white hats start thinking about all the people who do know what's going on and are awake. And look, I get it. I understand there's an argument to be made there. But at the end of the day, this is about unification of society. Where we go one, we go all. Yeah. And the only way to get there is to prioritize all of these people who have very childlike mindsets and to gradually inch them along and eventually get them to face reality. But again, we are so far into that process. That's the good news with everything that's happening right now. The arrests, the resignations, pretty soon there's going to be the suicides that we were told about. I mean, this stuff is heating up really, really fast in 2026. So that's the good news, is that I think we have really kind of crossed the Rubicon here. We're going to see things accelerate more and more and more with every passing day. I mean, I'm just like, my head is spinning trying to keep up with all the developments that are happening on a daily basis. It's incredible, and it's only going to intensify. So
I agree. It's moving at such a rapid pace, and this is why, I always want to address regards to mindsets, because to me, the faction that changes the way we're controlled for so long is in our belief system of how we compartmentalize our thought process. And number one thing that we do as kids is, if something traumatic happens, we start to compartmentalize to protect ourselves. It's a survival instinct.
Right.
And once we get that, if it doesn't get any other strong support, we start to build even bigger walls around the compartmentalization of it. If the trauma continues, then we actually build more compartments. Mm-hmm. Hence, it's even harder to break that programming.
Right.
And very fortunately, that I'm sure you experienced it when you had the epiphany of, oh, I'm not this. This is my human potential. This is why I always tell the audience, hey, when my 29th year, when I had the rebirth, it was that distinctive defining moment of understanding what my human potential was versus what my human programming was. And that made the biggest difference in regards to how I went about it. So to give a short story on this, the Internal Revenue Service thing, it's just like the ultimate iron fist that's going to come smashing down. Like, it's like dealing with mafia, right? You're not going to go to the Don and go, hey, I'm sorry, I just can't pay my VIG. You're going to lose something, pal. We're going to take something from you. So that impression has been given to us by this cabal deep state system that is going to strong arm you. Now, about 20 some years ago, I discovered this gentleman named Erwin Schiff, who was talking about the way that the American birth certificates was being sold overseas, how we were slaves to the system, and how income tax was voluntary. And man, the government went after this dude fiercely and imprisoned him. Mm-hmm. Then he eventually got out. He kept on at it. And the thing that blows my mind is, even though he was already slapped on the wrist, went to prison for it, he didn't give up his, mission. So he created this pay no income tax entity and was in Las Vegas. So folks in Las Vegas probably do remember this 20 some years ago. I developed a relationship with Erwin, went to his seminars and started following. And I actually contested income tax personally all the way up to tax court. And at tax court, I took my laptop because at that time, this is the most portable thing you have. And I literally stood right in front of tax court and goes, Sir, you're not a real judge. And I want to challenge any attorney in this room. I have Title 26 and it opened up my laptop. Show me where I need to give you money. You get a few chuckles. And the judge, the tax court judge, which is not really appointed by anybody, he just kind of went, well, Mr. Wong, if everybody believed in what you're doing, we'd be in a sad state of the United States. We wouldn't be able to function the way we are. Oh, no shit, Sherlock, because you wouldn't be corrupted. So what actually happened is nothing. Can you believe that? I went home, got the transcript from that court hearing, and they couldn't do a thing to me until they put leverage to my boss. Now, this is the big, huge difference. If you work for a company, the company files taxes, they give consent to hold your money. And you can fight this all day long in your attorneys and all that, and you're just not going to win because you're their property. So it's just like no difference in the guy who invented He-Man for Mattel. He gets no money for it. Mattel owns the rights of it. And Mattel is now going to make this great big movie, right? So the creator, he's having, GoFundMe because he's ill. Just shows you how upside down the world is. You have to really honor and respect that. So I was working for wealthy Jewish family, millionaires. The last thing they're going to do is, we're going to protect my little employee. No, I'll take care of them. They sat on my money until they forced me to file a tax return to give consent. Then they were going to release my money. But by giving my consent, man, you can tell the avalanche of the so-called assessment came in. So all of a sudden it's like, well, you owe us this because the Don says so. The reason why I want to tell that story is there's a level of bravado you must have in this lifetime if you want to achieve your human potential. If you only go with tradition, you're only going with programming, you're always going to be a miserable sap because of it. That is how they're teaching you to think and behave.
Yeah, it's they want you to be they want your operating system to be based upon fear. Absolutely. Okay, and various different manifestations of fear. That's the best way. I mean, you think about it. If you're an evil entity, what's the best way to control people? I mean, do you want a public that's enlightened? Do you want a public that's full of men who aren't cowards and women who aren't cowards? Do you want people who are healthy? Do you want people who know how to think independently? No, you want just the opposite of all that stuff. And at the root of it all, and what keeps people enslaved is fear.
Yeah.
And, the example of Irwin Schiff that you talked about, was thrown in prison and everything. They threw the book at him and so forth. That's the definition of heroism. In my mind, when you're willing to, first of all, to rise above your fears and to challenge the system that's trying to rule you with fear, and then you suffer the consequences of that, and you still don't back down. I mean, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Of the men and women who came before us, who were not afraid to challenge the system, who were not afraid and didn't live in fear. And that's the thing. There is, listen. I mean, I'm just as human as the next person. And I don't paint myself as some sort of heroic figure by any stretch, because I have fears too that I contend with on a daily basis. We all do. But I also came to recognize that based upon some of the things I was just talking about, the traumas, the difficulties that I went through, that's exactly where I was at a certain point in my life. I realized I was completely controlled by fear. And if I didn't find a way to break out of that and fight back against that and to challenge that, I was always perpetually going to be miserable. I was always going to be in that state. And even though I didn't think about it at the time when I started my podcast nearly 5 years ago, I mean, sure, I was afraid. I was definitely afraid to talk about the things that I was talking about. I mean, being a truther is dangerous business. I mean, regardless of whether or not you believe that, and I'll tell you one thing, when I first started my show, back on It was March 20th of 2021. By no stretch of the imagination did I believe at that point in time that the good guys were in control. I still thought that we were fighting against this evil enemy, you know? So, and it wasn't until later that I look back on a lot of these things and realized, oh yeah, okay. They actually did. They declared the Insurrection Act and they took control of DC and all this stuff. But the point being is that I realized that, like so many other people out there, after COVID, after the stolen election that was just so obvious, and I'm looking around and I'm going, to my wife, to my parents, to my friends, to my coworkers, to anyone I could find, looking for anyone who could recognize how obvious this was. I mean, they just stole the election. They just outright stole it in front of everybody's face after they put us through this bullshit pandemic and made us wear diapers on our faces and stand 6 feet up. I mean, the whole 9 yards. And I'm at this point where I'm thinking to myself, how does nobody else see this? How does and beyond that, even, why does nobody seem to care? Like, I'm over here fired up. I'm pissed off. I can't believe what's happening to my country. I feel like the walls are just closing in around me in every direction. And I knew that, I mean, in a sense, and it was kind of like a survival instinct for me. I realized I could not exist in living in that fear anymore. And regardless of what it meant, I knew that I was taking a risk, taking a chance. But I thought to myself, you know, there is a such thing. There are some fates that are worse than death, and that's living perpetually in fear. And that's something that I never, ever, ever. I mean, look, we all we all got to die someday. You know, we all owe God a death, as they say. But quite frankly, like I said, not some big hero or anything, but I'd much rather die on my feet fighting than to live on my knees in fear. And that's really what it ultimately comes down to. I think for all of us is that, you know, we've been conditioned from a very early age to be complacent, to be docile, to be easily manipulated. So I said, you know, most of these normies out there, I mean, they have a very childlike mindset. Like, they're very impressionable. They just listen to what the authority tells them, and they conform to it. They don't question it. But that's not the whole. I mean, that's not the spirit that this country was built upon. The exact opposite of that spirit,
Right.
A defiant spirit against tyranny, people who were willing to fight and die for freedom. And they stole that from us. You know, they stole that from us, and now we're taking it back. But in order to do that, again, you have to have a critical mass of people who are on that same wavelength. You know, it can't just be a small fringe group of people who actually understand and get it. And then you've got like 95% of the population who's just going to go along and follow the system. It's not going to work that way, which is why it had to be, by the way, a military civilian alliance. Sure, the military, I mean, heck, they could have handled this in a number of different ways. They could have just come in and been, you know, like on the white horse and saved the day and told everybody what they did and on and on and on. But in the end, for us to have a lasting awakening that's going to allow us to rebuild in the future, you have to have the entire population, minus 4 to 6% who are just too far gone. That's baked into the cake, so to speak. But you have to have a vast majority of people who are awake, aware, and who are willing to fight against evil. And that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. The military can't be the only ones who fight against the evil. The population has to recognize the evil, and they have to be willing to confront it themselves. But they also were smart enough to know that that was not going to be an overnight process. It was going to take years to condition the public to get there. And thank God above, we are finally breaking some major ground on that. So after many, many years of struggle, and believe me when I tell you, I mean, I started waking up right around like 2012, and I know people who have been awake for 30 plus years.
Right.
30 plus years they've been fighting this, you know, and it's just incredible. It's an incredible time to be alive, to actually witness everything that we've always known to be true starting to come to fruition, and to be able to live through it, to document it, and to walk and to walk through the process with like-minded people. You know, that's
Yes.
the incredible portion. The incredible part of this is, like, you know, our spiritual brothers and sisters, all the people out there in the audience, people that I work with, that I've connected with. We have the incredible gift, the blessing of watching all of this unfold around us. and to be awake and aware and understand, and to be able to sit back and say, wow, after all this time, here we are. So that's the good news, man. But yeah, it's been a long struggle to break free out of this matrix, but worth every minute, quite frankly. And we do it all over again because it's the only way. It really is the only way. New Hampshire's state slogan: "Live free or die." As far as I'm concerned, like, the truer words were never spoken. You know, there's no point in living this life if you're not going to live free, if you're not going to fight for what's right, fight for freedom, and stand up against evil. That's really ultimately, I think, what God wills for all of us to contribute while we're alive on this planet.
Yes. Thank you so much for that, because it's absolutely hits the heart of humanity. It's to recognize that we have to live through this. We have to reach our own human potential through this. If the white hats just came in on their knights in shining armor and took care of it, we would not have the freedom, because we would still be handheld, spoon fed.
We wouldn't have matured and grown as a society. It's like, it's almost as if, like, a vast majority of the population is stuck in this state of arrested development, and they never actually grew up. You know, this childlike mentality where they're just listening to what mommy and daddy tell them to do instead of thinking for themselves and actually living their own lives and making their own choices and all that sort of thing. That's what they do. Why do you think I mean, it's one of the many reasons, putting aside the satanic, the sick pedophilia and stuff. Why do you think that there's this obsession about propagandizing the youth, getting inside of their minds when they're young?
Yeah.
Right? And by the way, this is nothing new. This has been going on for decades. People who are in their 70s and 80s right now, they grew up under this system.
Yeah.
You know, and that's really what we need to break out of. Because again, like you say, if the white hats came in, the knight in shining armor, and saved the day, we would just be trading one controller for another.
That's right.
And we would not ascend. We would not grow as a species. That's ultimately what this is all about. One of the last words, I think the last word that Q left us with, the very last drop, was Ascension.
Yes.
You know, and you're not going to get to Ascension by just having the military coming in and saving the day and not requiring the public, we the people, the ones who make up this country, to play a role in that. In a sense, we have to earn it. I mean, the military took care, thank God, they took care of all the kinetic fighting. They spared us that bloody civil war that would have ripped this country apart, probably permanently. I'm not sure we ever would have come back if we had gone down that road. Like they said, they were prepared to do the unthinkable. If Trump had lost and Hillary had gotten in and there was no other way, they were prepared to do the unthinkable, a military coup that would have led to a civil war, brother against brother. I mean, it would have been horrific, and I'm not sure we ever would have come back from that. And certainly, we wouldn't have won the hearts and minds of the vast majority of the public. This is the only way that they could do it.
Right.
So
yeah, because if we went down that road, it would have been a third density fight. It would have been the so-called the consciousness never would have grown. The expansion of self would never have gone that direction. And that part that becomes disservice to the human potential, right? Because then we'll be stagnate and we just become another blip in the human history that's written with a blah and maybe an asterisk, and then it moves on, still searching for our creator, searching for our home, searching for our connection, and so forth.
I mean, we don't need a savior like the military to be our savior. I mean, thank God. I mean, and I'm not suggesting like I mean, Q even refers to the U.S. military as the savior of mankind. And in a way, I mean, that's true because they spared us having to go down that road. I mean, if Hillary came in, I mean, God, they had us right over a barrel. My goodness.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the whole process, so it's like the military had to save us from going off that cliff into that abyss. So in that sense, they are the savior. Yeah. But we had to ultimately learn to save ourselves. And that's the process that we've been engaged in this entire time. Like, we were so far gone. We were so brainwashed, so asleep that all Hillary had to do was come in there. I mean, we would have had, pandemics, we would have had the 5-year lockdowns, world war, civil war. I mean, it would have been absolute hell on earth, and we never would have seen it coming. A vast majority of the people never would have seen it coming. So the military had no choice but to get in there and to cut that off kinetically while we were all distracted with COVID, while we were all distracted with all this other stuff, they went in and they did the dirty work, and they removed this evil. Like I said, not all of it. There's still stuff that they're dealing with, but they cut the head off the snake, so to speak.
Right.
But that in and of itself is not sufficient to save humanity. In other words, like in order for us to ascend, to move to the next level of consciousness, and ultimately the next chapter of humanity. When you think about it, I mean, the future is going to be unbelievable. There's unlimited possibilities for humanity. But in order for us to get there, we had to earn it. The military is not just going to give it to us. We have to earn it.
Yeah.
And that's what this process has all been.
Yeah. And I think a lot of our audience who has grown in the last few years that has reached a level of connection within self, number one, but within family, within their relationships, because you can see it in the comments. You can see it in those live, chats and so forth, how people are behaving. Where at one time used to be a lot of skepticism, a lot of really, read this, read that, where today is, I'm so grateful for you, right? Yeah. There's a lot of gratefulness and thankfulness today that I didn't see 3-4 years ago. So I can see the shift moving. And that to me is extremely gratifying to have.
Dark to light. And like you said before about our baser instincts, okay? Yeah. Like the cabal, they impose their mindset on us. They impose their evil system on us. And their mindset, though, that's the thing. Yeah. They constructed, their Freemasons, they constructed this society in their image with their end game in mind, and to use us as tools, essentially, to do their bidding. But that's not the reason that we were created. And like you said, I mean, sure, we have those baser instincts. There's no doubt it's part of our nature, but that's not the totality of who we are. That's where we've been suppressed. People have used the metaphor of like the beach ball, like pushing the beach ball underneath the water in a pool, right? There's only so long. And then when you finally lose control of it, it shoots out. That's the potential of humanity. I mean, we are created in the image of God. And that's the other thing. I mean, you got to hold another spiritual layer to this. It's a war against, it's good versus evil. It's the enemy's minions that have controlled us, that have tried to turn us against God, who've tried to pervert us, who've tried to corrupt us. They've done all of these things to us because they hate God. But they can't get to God, so they go after God's children. They target God's children, and that's humanity. And ultimately, there's a lot more good out there than there is evil. That is a fact.
No question. Yes.
There is a lot more good than there is evil. And there's so much goodness and so much love and passion inside of humanity that's being suppressed right now that people don't even realize. They don't even know what you said, talking about your potential. People don't even realize what their potential is. They're stuck inside of this box. They feel like they're trapped. And most people, they never, it's sad, really, when I think about it, but how many generations have been born into this world and died and never were even aware of the things that we're talking about right now. We're never even aware that they were trapped inside of a box. We're never even aware that they were enslaved, and we're the generation that's finally breaking out, and we're laying the groundwork for the entire future of humanity. I mean, think about how big that is, how monumental it is. And no one of us is doing it alone. That's the other beautiful thing about it, is we're all coming together as a collective. We're bringing our own talents. Some of us are good at certain things and, not so good at other things, but that's the whole idea, is like we're actually functioning the way that God had intended. Like he didn't create us all perfectly. He created us so that we would need each other, so that we could learn from one another, that we could come together for the greater good of humanity. I mean, that's the way that the world is trending right now. We're moving out of this dark system where everybody's just driven by their baser instincts and ego. And at the end of all of this, think of how different society is going to look. I mean, people aren't going to be worshiping celebrities anymore, and people aren't going to be obsessed with the NFL and the Super Bowl, and
Yeah.
all, and people aren't going to be obsessed with making money, and all the things that drive most people. Again, all based upon ego and so forth. We're going to have once we rid ourselves of this evil, and humanity has reached a critical mass of awakening, and we're introduced to all this abundance that's been hidden from us. The whole concept of I mean, everything that we think about in terms of the way society is structured, like we're all rats inside of a maze chasing after that piece of cheese in the form of money or fame or whatever people think is going to make a difference in their lives. And the reality of the matter is that, I mean, I'm not suggesting being poor is fun. It's better to have money than to not have it. But the reality is that if money was the answer, heck, we'd know it by now. Some of the most miserable and evil people on earth as we know, are the most evil, corrupt people, on this planet, if they're even people. That's a whole separate conversation. But the point is that the whole dynamic is shifting, and all of our priorities, that mindset that we had imposed upon us, we are going through the process of removing that mindset and replacing it with a godly mindset.
Yeah.
Come together and to help each other and support each other and love each other. And that's why I've said right from the beginning that it's such a gift. People don't even realize, like most of the time, we spend our time as anons thinking, my God, like when is this going to end? And we get frustrated and we get angry and we this and that. And people are missing, like, don't you understand that you were chosen out of millions, billions of people out there? God chose you and woke you up ahead of everybody else. That in and of itself should define your life, should give your life purpose and meaning, even though if you don't necessarily know what you're going to do with it. Just knowing that you were chosen out of billions and billions of people to be there and to be awake and alive, and not just to be aware to observe it, but to actually assist in the process of awakening humanity and helping people through and guiding them through. I mean, that is a divine task. That's God's work.
Yes.
That we've been tasked with. So, I mean, that's something that we should always remember. I mean, sure, there's the ebbs and flows of psychological war. There's no question about this. It's not been an easy process, but that's part of the reason that you were chosen. You were chosen because, like I said before, God knew you could handle it the same way the white hats know that you can handle it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, there's no quit in you. You're going to continue to fight. You're going to continue to move forward. And you're going to continue to pray that you make it to the other side and you get to experience this beautiful new world that all of us are building together.
Yes. Yes. I think a big part that we are starting to recognize is it's not about the money. It's not about the possession. It's not about the status. It's about fulfillment. It's about the connection of at the most transparent truth within ourselves and within the ones we love. And if we reach that, irregardless, I mean, you got good food to eat, healthy food, you got a roof over your head. And if you're passionately, right, artistically self-expressive at the most honest way every day, what are you missing? The yacht, the Learjet? I mean, seriously.
It's all just toys. It's all ego. That's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. And again, it's tough to break that. For a lot of people, I mean, even people who are awake, we still sometimes, I mean, I find myself too worried about money and worried about this and worried about that. We have those 3D concerns, and I don't think that's a condemnation of any of us. I mean, all of us are works in progress, and we haven't fully been delivered out of this old system yet. So we're still, it's like I've described, we have a foot in two different worlds. Like we still have to function in both worlds as we're moving out of darkness into the light. But we understand that there's a limitation to all of those things. There's no amount of money and possessions and fame and anything out there that people search for to give their life meaning. There's no amount of that that's ever going to replace internal peace that comes from just a genuine gratitude and a connection to God, a connection to the people around you. That's ultimately what gives life meaning. The rest of this stuff, I mean, like they say, you can't take it with you anyway. And that's the thing at the end of the day, and money can't buy the most important things in life. You can't, like I said, I'm not suggesting, I'm not preaching poverty over here. The reality is that poverty is a construct of the enemy, by the way.
Mhm.
They created this system of the haves and the have-nots to create this class envy, to get everybody obsessed with money and status and getting ahead of the next guy and so forth. That's not what we were created for.
Right.
That's the way that they used us. They entrapped us. They enslaved us into this system, and we're breaking free from it. But there's no amount of any of those materialistic things that are going to replace that sense of internal peace and serenity inside of you. And that comes from living well. That comes from, from being godly ultimately. And we're all works in progress. That's the thing. Even those of us who are awake. I mean, don't kid yourself. I mean, I go through it. It's a daily struggle for me.
Yeah.
But at least being able to identify and understand these things is a massive, massive achievement. And then once we get to the other side and we see the great awakening happen and we bear witness to it, and the world changing all around us, and all of a sudden there's going to be so much abundance. There's going to be, people aren't going to have to worry about their health. They're not going to, in the same way, they're not going to be worried about paying their bills. They're not going to be worried about being poisoned all the time. I mean, so many of the fears that keep people trapped inside of the system are going to be gone. It's like the chains are going to be lifted, and we're going to have an entirely different sense of what it means to be human.
Yes.
Right. And what this experience of being on this planet is really all about.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautifully put, man. It's always so fulfilling and heartwarming to hear your point, because I think you speak so genuinely about your personal experience and your thoughts. And that's why I think you're very successful with your podcast. And also just the wealth of knowledge of the people you bring on as guests as well has educated and helped many of us tremendously. I listened to recent with you and Matt. I thought that was just incredible stuff. He's very dynamic.
He's a great guy.
Yeah, he's great. And I love how your take on it. It is just not, here's the white and the black of it. We really have to look at also the in-betweens. And of course, you and Mike King have, I think, shifted this planet in a lot of ways. And there's nothing, I believe, anything, especially, let's just go real quick because I know we're running up almost in 2 hours. Artificial intelligence was brought to us probably a little over a year and a half ago or 2 years ago for basically consumer use. And we all jumped on it. And it was like, it's going to help your business. It's going to do this and that and the other. And we all kind of bought into it. Within 6 months, I think a lot of us kind of found out, hey, artificial intelligence lied to us. When we want something, it just makes up crap.
Yeah.
Then now we realize artificial intelligence is just regurgitating what the factions put down as history or facts. So therefore, when it tells me this historian proven factual historic statements are still lies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it's just
as good as programming, ultimately. Yeah. It's a great tool for research, but you also have to have the understanding at the macro level that the information that it's spitting back at you is not necessarily truthful information. It's information that it's been programmed with. I mean, you can see, you just go into Grok or Chat GPT or whatever, you ask a question, and you can even see the websites that it's referencing and cross-referencing. It's basically just taking what's already out there.
Yeah.
And so as consolidating that information and giving you a response to your question, but it's not really breaking any new ground in that sense. Right. Because it's still, and this is also part of the exposure operation as well. I think what you just talked about is people coming to that determination and saying, wait a second, and it's an interesting experiment. Sometimes you can ask AI a question, something that to be true, but you also know, I mean, pretty much anything that we talk about and believe in, like that is still considered in the mainstream as a conspiracy. That's the way it's going to frame the answer.
Yeah.
That's the way it works. And so, yeah, absolutely. And it's still, it's an interesting tool. It's the next evolution of the internet, of information technology. But it's, and I think it has tremendous potential to help humanity if wielded in the right hands, just like any other tool,
Yeah, but it's a nice tool. You're absolutely right on that. And the thing is to be able to understand. Sometimes it's a screwdriver, sometimes it's a wrench. You can't use a wrench when you need a screwdriver. And you can't think that entire toolbox can do everything you want. It just simply does not.
And not to mention the fact, like the old adage goes, you can take a hammer and you can build a house with it, or you can use it to bash somebody's head in. It all depends on whether, who's actually holding that hammer and what their intentions are, and, so forth. A tool is a tool. It's not a replacement for human consciousness. That's for darn sure. It's something that can augment, but it's not, it can go in either direction. I think that's part of what we're witnessing right now with humanity is, I do believe, again, the good guys being in control and ultimately working to get us ready to hand that control over to us. That's the other thing. I mean, they saved us from this horrible hell on earth existence, but they're not just going to hand us the keys to the kingdom until we're ready to actually accept that responsibility. So in that process too, they're showing us again, they're showing us both sides. They're showing us the amazing potential that we have, but they're also exposing the existential threats of a lot of these tools so that we can come together and decide as a collective, as a group, how we're actually going to wield these tools and what we're going to do with them. But the good news is that the enemy is not in control of those tools anymore, even though it may appear that way optically in order to get people, again, because that's the other thing. I mean, how effective the operation wouldn't be effective. I mean, you and I can sit here and we can say, yeah, the white hats are in full control. We can have this conversation with our audience. But if like 25, 30 million people were listening to this podcast and everybody had the same understanding, the operation wouldn't be effective, you see. That's the thing. So only a small group of us, relatively small group of us, can recognize what the white hats are going to do. I believe they always knew that there were going to be certain ones, a relatively small subset of the population that was going to figure out what was going on. We're not going to have all the answers. We're not going to have the roadmap. We don't have a crystal ball, but we'd be able to understand the nature of what was happening. But for the rest of everybody else out there, the operation and the optics associated with it have to appear very real in order for them to be effective. You're not gonna get anybody concerned about anything. If everybody believed, if 100 million people out there believed like we do, that the U.S. military, that we're in continuity of government, a lot of these people would just sit back and go, whatever, I don't care. They would just they wouldn't engage. It would have the opposite effect.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I think this whole thing comes about, that is teaching us, is don't be lazy. Don't hand off your responsibility just because you think something intelligent is here to assist you. It's going to do it for you. It's not.
Same principle we talked about with the military. So, it's applicable in a different context. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So to wrap this up, and like I said, your conversation is always so enlightening. I just love talking with you.
I appreciate that, man. I really do. And thank you for the kind words. I didn't address that, but I appreciate all that. I really do. And I think that there are a lot of individuals out there that I bring on my platform, the people who I think my audience are going to benefit from the most in terms of their information, their knowledge, like people like Mike King, top of that list, and Dave from News Treason, and some other people that I work with on a regular basis. The way I look at myself and my contribution to the movement is like, I just speak openly and honestly about my thoughts, my feelings. I mean, that's really kind of my forte. That's how my whole platform started. I didn't come into this with a certain level of expertise in decoding, or a military background, or a historical background, or a technological background. I'm just like I'm like an everyday guy. I'm just an ordinary American. But I think what I can offer to people is the ability to articulate what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling, and sort of like give people a sense of what the big picture is. That's the way I've always looked at, what I contribute to this movement. And fortunately, a lot of people really benefit from that. So
absolutely.
I appreciate the kind words. Thank you.
Well, that's why, I described it as the heart and soul of the Patriot community, because you do bring that for all of us.
That's one heck of a compliment, man. I thank you. Appreciate that.
And, okay. So to wrap this up, and I know this is something that is just somewhat unexpected at this time, which is the president of the United States is going to go into this UFO disclosure, and Stephen Greer is getting on the platform talking about him writing the disclosure for President Trump. What is your thought behind that?
Wow. Well, I think the disclosure about UFO technology, about alien life, etc., it's kind of similar to what we talked about tonight. It's multi-pronged in the sense that um, I believe that optically it's sort of being made to look like this is being used as a distraction to get everybody to focus their attention elsewhere. Right now,
Mm,
taking a step back for a moment here, consider the vastness of space. I mean, when Q was asked the question, are we alone in the universe? And it was a very unequivocal no. Consider the vastness of space, etc. And I think that most of the people that I've talked to are at least open to the idea that we're not alone in the universe. And people have very different viewpoints on that. A lot of it, in my experience, is filtered through a religious lens. When you start to talk about aliens and UFOs with a certain crowd, they'll say, "No, no, that doesn't exist. That's like fallen angels." But still, they agree in principle. What's interesting about that is the thing that people fight about
mm,
is the nature of how to define it, right? Like some people will just say aliens from other planets, and
mm,
other people will say no, they're fallen angels from heaven. But either way, you're acknowledging that there's an entity, that there are other life forms that, well, however you want to choose to define them, that do exist that are not human.
mm,
And I think that in a sense, most people who are in the truth community fall somewhere in that spectrum, right?
mm.
Um, as far as your question was kind of like the timing of the disclosure or the discussion about disclosure. Was that?
Yeah, because right in the middle of this whole craziness of the Epstein file drop, we're seeing this whole sub level of heinous acts and ritualistic stuff that everybody used to think was just fantasy,
Mhm.
which a lot of people thought UFOs are fantasy. Star Trek,
Right.
the Orville, all these things. We're going to get the other script now being exposed. And of course, Stephen Greer, whether you like him or not, this guy has enough history with the planet about covering this topic. And for him to go on social platform and to say, hey, I'm going to write this disclosure for the president, I mean, that's pretty stout.
Well, I think it's part of the movie. If that's anything that's
Yeah.
playing out right now isn't, at least in my opinion, is not happening organically. In
Mm,
terms of, especially in terms of, don't get me wrong, like we talked about earlier, like organic things are still happening every day. Like the White Hats aren't in control. Like if I go outside and sprain my ankle or something like that, I can't be like, wow, the White Hats didn't, they didn't rescue me from that. Like we still exist in reality, right?
yeah.
But as far as the information that we're being given, none of that stuff is in my opinion is really organic. It's all being scripted, especially when it comes to issues like disclosure. I mean, that we
Mm,
know that the White Hats are fully in control of whatever narratives are being put out there. Where Stephen Greer falls in the grand scheme of things, I don't know. But one thing I will say is that there are, my understanding and my belief is that there are going to be, so Werner von Braun, when he was on his deathbed, and I'm sure you know this whole story, basically said that the Cabal's last stand was going to be to have some sort of a fake alien invasion
right.
of some kind. And they were going to, I mean, the Cabal was never going to tell us the truth about anything. That's the reality. That's really kind of who they were. Is like they knew they were in possession of the truth, and they were hiding it all from us. But they were going to have this fake alien invasion, and they were going to use that as an impetus to to further their agenda of the New World
Yeah.
Order. So that's like one avenue. And then there's the real disclosure, right? About like the actual truth. Like what is the act? What's the nature of the world? Is it a spinning ball? Is it a flat plane? Are there aliens? Are there fallen angels? Like what's going on with Antarctica? All of these different questions. The real disclosure.
Yeah.
And my understanding and belief is that the White Hats, just like everything else we've talked about tonight, they're going to show us both.
Mm,
They're gonna give us the optics again, because think about the optics of the movie, right?
yeah.
The optics of the movie is not that the White Hats are in control, right? The optics of the movie are at best that, that there's a force battling against this evil force at best, but it seems for the target audience out there that this evil system that they're gradually becoming aware of is very firmly entrenched. Optics that are necessary for the movie. So I think that what we're going to see as far as the disclosure about non-human life and all the other things that I just listed, and many other things as well, where did we really come from? How long have we been here? On and on and on, is going to be a sort of a hybrid where they're going to show us what the cabal had in store for us, but then there's going to be a rug pull, if you will. And again, the creative geniuses far beyond my level are the ones who are scripting this thing out. And by the way, I believe very firmly that they're using advanced off-planet, call it what you will, technology that the AI that we have is it's like a kid's toy compared to what they have at their disposal in terms of being able to plot this thing out methodically and with military precision. There's no way, at least in my opinion, that a human mind could have scripted all of this the way that they have without some sort of augmentation. So I think what they're going to do is they're going to show us what the cabal had in store, but then that there's ultimately going to be some sort of a revelation that no, this was actually what the enemy was planning on inflicting upon you. Because they knew eventually, that's the other thing about the cabal, is they knew that God's creation, which is all of us, could not be, it's like the beach ball. They couldn't keep it down there forever, that there was going to come a point naturally where we were going to evolve to a different or higher level of consciousness. And the question for the enemy was, how do they manage that?
Right.
How can they wield that to their advantage? So they knew eventually people were going to get to a point where we know that there are anti-gravity technology. We know that there's other forms of life out there and so forth. And you can only lie to the public for so long and maintain your credibility. So they had to come up with their whole agenda and how they were going to plan that. So I think in short, I think they're going to show us that, or some form of that. Maybe a scare event of some kind. I don't know. We could speculate all day long about how they're going to play out the climax of this movie. I have no idea. I've given up trying to figure it out. But then there's going to be the real disclosure on the other end of it, because, it isn't really the Great Awakening. The Great Awakening is rooted in truth.
Yes.
That's the bottom line. So right now we're in the midst of this psychological operation that's being conducted by the good guys on the public for all the reasons that we've discussed tonight. But at the end of the day, eventually you have to transition out of the movie and you have to transition into the truth. And there has to be disclosure about who we really are, where we really came from, the true nature of the universe, etc. So I think it's going to be sort of both, a hybrid of those two things.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. Well, Patriot, thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a fantastic conversation. I mean, we went a little of this, a little of that, everywhere. And I hope everybody out there in Red Pill family had a great time joining us and listening to us. Don't forget to like and subscribe always, and share. And of course, follow Patriot Underground on Rumble, on X, and you still got Telegram, right?
Oh yeah. Yep. Telegram is my first social media before I joined X. From the beginning, I've been on Telegram. So yeah, you can find me on Telegram at, gosh, I don't even remember the handle name. It's been such, the share on Telegram is just at Patriot Underground 2021.
Yeah.
And you can also find me on X at Patriot UG 2023. I can send you those links to make it easier for people. And likewise, I think after this, it airs, I'm going to share it on my channel as well. So if you want to send me your links, hopefully some of my audience can do likewise for you and follow your great platform as well.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you on the next Conversations on the Fringe. Stay with me here while I play us out.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. The air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation. I want you to get mad.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
The more you fuck around, the more you're going to find out.
These people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy.
We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. It's as simple as that.
I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"